The glass fogged under the breath of the scarred German shepherd as he placed his massive paws on the driver's side window, eyes locked on the tiny girl inside. Emma Parker didn't move, only clutched her worn, stuffed rabbit tighter heart, thudding against her ribs. She was sick, small, and quiet, but something deep in her stilled as the three dogs surrounded the car like sentinels. One by the back, one by the passenger door, and the scarred leader before her, still silent, watchful. Her stepmother, Catherine, emerged from the supermarket plastic bags, rustling, and froze mid-step. She dropped them when she saw the dogs. Shards of glass from a shattered pickle jar glittered on the asphalt. The sight Emma locked in a car, surrounded by imposing dogs, sent Catherine's pulse racing. But there was no growling, no aggression, just presence, intent, like they were waiting for something, or someone. Inside the car, Emma whispered, "They're not mean." Her words were calm, oddly assured. "They just want something." Catherine slid into the driver's seat, slowly, hands trembling. Years ago, a Rottweiler had left scars on her arm and in her mind. Dogs were her unspoken fear. But Emma was calm, unafraid, even reaching out gently toward the smallest shepherd, a female who watched her not with hunger, but something closer to recognition. And then Catherine noticed it, a collar. Not a tattered rope like most strays wore, but a sturdy, well-worn leather one. Her fingers fumbled at the metal tag, revealing not just an ID, but a tiny capsule affixed to the collar. Inside it, a tightly rolled waterproof note and a photograph. The note was written with the labor of age or illness. It was from Robert Wells, a retired U.S. Army veteran. The dogs, Max, Duke, and Lady, had been his lifeline, his family. If anyone found them, he pleaded, help them, keep them together. They were service dogs, trained and loyal, but at risk if separated or handed to the wrong people. Catherine looked from the note to the dogs, then to Emma, who was already pressing her palm to the window beside Lady. "We can't leave them," Emma said softly, her voice carrying the weight of someone much older. "They're looking for someone. I think they thought we were him." Catherine swallowed hard. The dogs hadn't chosen them by accident. The sun dipped lower as Catherine made calls, first to James, who didn't answer, then to animal control. 3 hours minimum, they told her. Emma watched the dogs intently, her small hand still against the glass. "They'll get hit," she whispered. "They're not meant to stay here." More shoppers arrived, some giving the vehicle wide berths, others peering with curiosity. One elderly man stepped closer, only to halt when Max turned and fixed him with a silent, unwavering stare. Catherine exhaled sharply. These dogs were disciplined, trained. Soldiers. Drawing on muscle memory from her years as a veterinary nurse, Catherine cracked the door open and reached for Max's collar. He didn't flinch. Her fingers found a tag, one of the kind used to track microchips. But what gripped her was the presence of the dogs. They didn't feel like strays. They felt placed. The photo confirmed it. A gaunt man in a wheelchair flanked by the 3 shepherds, sitting tall and alert. His eyes held dignity, strength, love. "We're taking them," Catherine said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. "But just for the night." Emma's eyes lit up. It was the first time since her mother's death that Catherine had seen her truly smile. "They can sleep in my room." "No," Catherine replied quickly. "They'll stay in the barn, just until we figure this out." Max stepped back calmly as she opened the door wider, watching her with a gaze that seemed to measure and judge. Duke and Lady followed suit, responding to the makeshift leashes she tied with old rope from the truck bed, as if obeying silent commands. As she guided them toward the car, something clicked in her chest, a soft shift between terror and trust. As she loaded them in the back seat, the hum of something deeper stirred. She didn't yet know their names, but the way they watched her, not with wild hope or confusion, but with quiet expectation, said everything. They had found her. Or maybe somehow they had found each other. Gravel crunched under the wheels of the sedan as it crept up the long driveway to the Parker farmhouse. Twilight bled over the Tennessee hills, painting the house in shadow. In the back seat, the 3 German shepherds sat upright and composed like passengers, trained for silence. Emma twisted in her seat, eyes wide, cheeks flushed. "They're here, Daddy," she called as they pulled in. James Parker stood on the porch, fatigue draped over him like a heavy coat. His construction-worn hands gripped the railing. The sight of 3 massive dogs in the back of his car pulled a sharp breath from him. "Catherine," he began, warning, and weariness tangled in his tone. She stepped out, steadying herself. "They're trained service dogs, James, from a veteran, just for the night. We can't afford this," he muttered, pulling Emma close. "Food care, our grocery budget is already tight." "They'll sleep in the barn," she replied, avoiding his eyes as she led the dogs one by one out of the car. Max Duke Lady all moved with practiced grace, their discipline undeniable. As Emma tried to argue for them to stay inside, Catherine gently insisted. "They have thick fur. They'll be warm. It's temporary." Dinner that night was tense. Emma for once chatted brightly about Max in Vietnam, about Lady putting her head on her lap when she missed Mommy. James pushed food around his plate silent until he finally snapped. "They're not staying. We can't keep them." Emma's lip trembled. "They chose us." James's tone softened. "Sometimes life doesn't work the way we want. These dogs need a home that can actually care for them." Catherine watched the light dim in Emma's eyes, the same light she'd seen flicker back to life just hours before. "May I be excused?" Emma asked, the polite distance in her voice, a blade Catherine recognized all too well. Later that night, Catherine and James argued quietly. About fear, about money, about how she, a woman once paralyzed by canine trauma, could now stand beside these dogs. "I'm managing," she said simply. But even as she said it, she knew her resolve was thin. What she didn't say was that for the first time, Emma had been happy, and maybe that was worth being afraid. The sound came just past midnight, a soft thud followed by the subtle creak of a window sliding open. Catherine bolted upright in bed. A chill cut through the silence. "Emma," she whispered. She and James rushed down the hallway. The bedroom was empty, the window ajar. Outside, footprints pressed into the flower bed like a trail of quiet rebellion. They followed them to the barn, hearts pounding. Inside, the dim light caught Emma curled up between Max and Duke Lady's head resting in her lap. The barn smelled of straw and earth and something older like loyalty, made tangible. None of the dogs moved as they entered. They simply lifted their heads, eyes calm, protective. "They were crying," Emma whispered, as if it explained everything. "They miss him." James tried to reason. "Dogs don't talk, sweetheart." "Not with words," Emma replied. "But they still talk. Max is hurting." She touched her own side. Catherine followed her gaze and spotted matted fur, a healing wound. "Duke's stomach hurts. He eats slow." "Lady. She's the youngest, but she takes care of them." Catherine knelt slowly. Max didn't flinch as she parted his fur. A gash along his ribs, clean but raw, confirmed Emma's words. Her medical instincts took over, dulling the fear. "This needs cleaning," she murmured. James stood at the barn entrance, eyes unreadable. "1 week," he said at last, voice rough. "We keep them for 1 week while we try to find the owner or a new home. That's it." Emma nodded, but the look in her eyes said otherwise. As they walked back to the house, Emma slipped a hand into each of theirs, her fingers warm and sure. Catherine felt the moment settle between them, not like a decision, but like gravity shifting. The dogs had breached something more than fences and barn doors. They had cracked open the walls around a wounded family, and none of them would ever be the same again. Catherine rose before dawn the next morning, drawn by anxiety and a threadbare sense of duty. She slipped out into the crisp air medical kit, in hand, her breath visible in the shifting autumn mist. She paused outside the barn, bracing herself for chaos, for barking, for charging bodies. But when she opened the door, the stillness inside stopped her. Max sat near the entrance erect and composed his amber eyes, meeting hers without challenge. Duke lay resting alert but quiet. Lady stretched silently tail, sweeping across the hay in slow rhythm. No lunges, no barking, just presence. Respect. "Good morning," Catherine said awkwardly, her voice sounding foreign in the vast hush. Max approached without command, lowering himself beside her and lifting his flank, presenting the wound. She knelt. Hands trembling slightly, she cleaned the area with practiced care, the antiseptic scent grounding her. He didn't move, not a twitch. The trust felt like something sacred. "You're a good boy," she whispered, her voice catching. It had been decades since she'd touched a dog without fear. From behind, Emma's voice broke the quiet. "He likes you." Startled, Catherine turned. The girl stood barefoot in a nightgown, her hair tousled, one hand resting on Lady's back. "I heard her get up," Emma said simply. "Dogs hear things we don't." Over the next few days, the rhythm of the house changed. Catherine maintained her distance, but she found herself returning to the barn. To check wounds, to measure food, to speak in soft reassurances she didn't think she had anymore. The dogs never crossed her boundaries. They waited for her signal, watched her without expectation. Max especially seemed to understand her fragility, positioning himself protectively between her and the aggressive rooster that always flustered her near the chicken coop. And James, though still firm in his practicality, started changing too. On the fourth morning, Catherine found him in the barn, adjusting collars he'd bought on his lunch break. The old ones were chafing, he said gruffly, not meeting her eyes. She noticed the dog training manual tucked between truck seats later that night. No one spoke about it. But everything was shifting, especially Emma. Emma bloomed like spring after frost. She no longer drifted like a ghost through rooms. Instead, she read books aloud to the dogs in the barn, introduced them to her stuffed animals, and whispered secrets to Lady with the hushed reverence of prayer. Where once there had been silence, now there was laughter, light and sharp and rare. "They need us," she told her parents one morning over breakfast. "But I think we need them too." Catherine and James exchanged a glance. They had placed calls, emailed veterans groups, and followed every legal path to locate Robert Wells. Most inquiries dead-ended with vague replies until one answer came from the VA. Robert Wells had been transferred to a hospice facility 3 weeks prior. Privacy laws meant they couldn't say more. He might be alive. He might not. The uncertainty unsettled Catherine. Meanwhile, Duke's appetite continued to decline. He picked at food, winced while lying down. Catherine's professional alarm bells rang louder each day. "He needs to be seen," she told James quietly. Dr. Warner confirmed it, a mass in Duke's abdomen, likely cancer. Surgery could give him years, if performed soon. But the estimate was staggering. $3,000, Catherine whispered, later voice thin with guilt. "For a dog we're not even sure we're allowed to keep." James's hands clenched. "We're 2 months behind on the mortgage." Back at home, Catherine found Officer Reynolds at their kitchen table sipping tea. Beside him sat a manila folder and a storm. Thomas Crawford, Robert's supposed nephew, had surfaced claiming legal ownership of the dogs. "He's provided documentation," Reynolds said. "On paper, he's the next of kin." Catherine's hands curled into fists. Robert's note said he didn't trust him, that Crawford might want the dogs for money. The dogs are valuable, Reynolds agreed. I'll investigate, but if Crawford's documents hold up, the law may side with him. Emma, listening nearby, paled. But he won't take care of them, she said softly. He won't save Duke. Reynolds knelt beside her. I know you care about them, but unless we prove otherwise, your time with them might be short. After he left, silence returned. Then Catherine revealed what she'd discovered. Duke's microchip was registered not to Robert Wells, but to the U.S. Army's Working Dog Program, specifically the 75th Ranger Regiment. Emma looked up slowly. That's Grandpa's unit, she whispered. Everything changed in that moment. The name on the microchip, Lieutenant Robert Wells, was paired with another Captain John Parker James's late father. The revelation rippled through the Parker household like a seismic wave. The dogs weren't just war heroes. They were family tied by loyalty and service to a man they had mourned, and a lineage Emma barely remembered. Suddenly, they weren't strangers anymore. Word spread fast in their small town. Neighbors began dropping by, some with food, others with quiet encouragement. A mason jar labeled Duke's Surgery Fund appeared on the clinic counter, collecting folded bills and scribbled prayers. The hardware store owner offered premium dog food. The church ladies baked casseroles and whispered about miracles. James stopped mentioning rehoming the dogs. Catherine, too, had changed. She no longer flinched when Max brushed past her. Lady had taken to sleeping outside her bedroom door, a silent guardian. Catherine left the door cracked open now. You're different with them, James said one evening as they watched Emma play fetch in the dusk. They're predictable, she replied. They respect space, boundaries, and they protected Emma. That counts. James hesitated. Should we fight for them? If Crawford comes back with lawyers? Before she could answer, the phone rang. Catherine watched James's face change as he listened, curiosity fading into stunned silence. When he finally spoke, his voice barely held together. Robert Wells is alive. Alive. In hospice care, weakened by cancer, and asking to see his dogs. And them. The next morning arrived cloaked in fog, as if the world itself held its breath. Catherine prepared Duke, carefully, worried by how weak he had become overnight. The mass inside him was pressing on vital organs now. Time was slipping through their fingers. They loaded the 3 shepherds into the car and drove toward Nashville. Emma sat in the back, stroking Lady's head, her voice a hush. They know where we're going, she said. James gripped the steering wheel tighter. Catherine kept her hand on Duke's chest, feeling every shallow breath. Everything they thought they knew about Robert, about fate, about how the dogs had found them, was about to be rewritten. The Magnolia Gardens Hospice sat quietly beneath a canopy of towering magnolia trees, its red brick softened by age and shade. A nurse met them in the parking lot, eyes kind, but wary. He's weak, she said, but he's alert, and he's been waiting. They moved through hushed hallways and emerged into a courtyard. Catherine knelt by Duke's carrier, her fingers trembling. I don't know if he can handle this, she whispered. James placed a hand on her back. Maybe this is exactly what he needs. As if summoned, all 3 dogs turned toward the building at once. The French doors opened, and Robert Wells appeared, gaunt, sunken, but proud in his wheelchair, shoulders pulled straight like a soldier, in formation. Max whimpered first, a trembling sound that cracked the silence. Lady strained forward, tail twitching, and inside the carrier, Duke struggled, rising with more strength than he should have had. My boys, Robert whispered, voice breaking, and my lady girl. You found them. Catherine let Max go. He crossed the courtyard in perfect form, pressing his head into Robert's palm. Lady followed, tail wagging with cautious joy. And then Duke Catherine, helping him down, gently limped forward, ribs heaving, but gaze locked on the man he had waited for. "What's happened to him?" Robert asked, brushing Duke's side. "He has a mass," Catherine answered gently. "It may have ruptured. He needs emergency surgery." Robert nodded, blinking back tears. He was always the sensitive one, strong where it counted, but delicate in the body. Emma approached and knelt by his chair. "We've been taking care of them," she said. "They picked us." Robert smiled weakly. "I see that." He pulled out legal documents from a leather folder the nurse had retrieved. A transfer of ownership, a final will, banking paperwork. "They're yours if you want them. My time is nearly up. But they deserve a home where they're seen, where they're understood." Catherine's throat tightened. The weight of the decision hung heavy, but before she could speak, Duke collapsed, a soft cry escaping him as his legs gave way. "Go," Robert said urgently. "Take him. Save him. Everything else can wait." James lifted the shepherd into his arms. Catherine grabbed the paperwork, and without another word they ran. The hours that followed blurred into a whirlwind of fluorescent lights and beeping monitors. Dr. Warner moved quickly, assessing Duke's fragile condition. "If we don't operate now," she said, "he won't make it through the night." In the sterile calm of the operating room, Catherine scrubbed in beside Warner, her hands steady, even as her chest tightened. James waited outside with Emma, Max, and Lady curled at their feet. The dogs didn't move, only watched the surgical doors, their bodies still, but their eyes alert. Midway through the operation, the clinic door slammed open. Officer Reynolds strode in, escorting a handcuffed Thomas Crawford. "I want my dogs." Crawford spat, eyes blazing. "They're mine. I've got documents." "You forged them," Reynolds replied coldly. "You tried to access Robert Wells' bank account too. That's felony fraud." James stood, body taut with rage. "Duke is in surgery right now, because you left them in a parking lot like trash." Crawford sneered. "Do you even know what they're worth, fully trained military dogs? Tens of thousands apiece." "That's exactly why you'll never get them back," James said, his voice low. "They're not for sale. They're family." Reynolds nodded to his partner. "Get him out of here. The Parkers will file formal statements later." Once the door shut, the clinic seemed to exhale. Then James made another call to the hospice. His voice cracked when the nurse answered. "Please, just hold the phone near him. He needs to know." Emma knelt, her voice steady, despite her age. "Mr. Robert Duke's in surgery, but he's fighting, and we promise we'll keep them together. Forever." No one knew if Robert heard her, but 20 minutes later he passed quietly in his sleep. When Dr. Warner emerged from the operating room, her eyes were tired but bright. "We got it all," she said. "The mass ruptured, but we removed it. He's stable." Catherine sank to her knees beside Max and Lady. "He's going to be okay," she whispered, and for the first time, both dogs leaned in, pressing against her without fear. The relief was profound, but it was tempered by the silence that followed. Robert was gone. He knew, Emma whispered, curling into Lady's side. That's why he could go. Duke's safe now. The clinic had grown still by the time the final call came. Dr. Warner handed Catherine a sealed envelope. Written in trembling handwriting across the front were the words, "For Duke's new family." Inside, a check for $155,000 and a brief note, "For Duke's care and to help ease the transition. The remaining funds will transfer upon my passing. My dogs chose wisely. Thank you for completing our mission. Robert Wells, Captain U.S. Army Ret." The air in the room changed. The weight of financial worry that had pressed on the Parkers for so long lifted in an instant, but in its place settled something heavier: responsibility. They were no longer just caretakers of 3 war dogs. They were guardians of legacy, of love, of sacrifice. "What do we do now?" James asked, his voice quiet beneath the hum of medical machines. Catherine didn't answer right away. She looked down at Emma, fast asleep between Max and Lady on the waiting room bench. She looked at her husband, haunted and relieved and stunned all at once. And then she looked inward toward the fear that had once defined her. "We go home," she said at last. "All of us, together, and we figure the rest out tomorrow." 3 days later, they stood beneath the gray skies of the Nashville Veterans Cemetery. Robert Wells was laid to rest with quiet honors. Max and Lady flanked Emma like soldiers, still as stone, the only movement in them the flick of an ear or the whisper of breath. James stood straighter that day. Catherine's hand found his without hesitation. They weren't broken people anymore. They were something rebuilt. At the cemetery, a silver-haired veteran approached the family after the service. Captain Daniel Morrison, Robert's former commanding officer. He knelt before Max, brushing his hand through the dog's fur with reverence. Robert devoted his life to these animals. After injury ended his military career, Morrison said. "They're not just trained, they're extraordinary." He handed James a card. "Call me if you ever need help. Their training, let's just say it goes deeper than you think." As they prepared to leave, a black sedan pulled up. Out stepped Thomas Crawford, free on bail, flanked by a sharp-eyed lawyer, holding a leather briefcase. His expression was composed, but his eyes burned with calculation. Officer Reynolds, lingering nearby, leaned in. "That's Martin Blackwell, Nashville's most ruthless estate attorney. Be careful." Blackwell wasted no time. He approached the Parkers briskly, pulling documents from his briefcase. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, you are hereby served. Return the 3 German Shepherds currently in your possession to my client Thomas Crawford, legal heir to the estate of Robert Wells." Emma stepped back. Max moved instantly between her and Crawford. "No," James said simply. Blackwell's brows rose. "I suggest you reconsider. There will be consequences." James didn't flinch. "We have Robert's notarized transfer of ownership, witnessed, signed, and a check that proves his intent." Catherine stepped forward, voice even, but unyielding. "You can challenge it, but we'll fight. These dogs saved a man's life, saved a little girl's heart, and they're not property to be auctioned off." Blackwell hesitated just for a second. "We'll see you in court." He turned, and Crawford followed, though not before locking eyes with James, his gaze cold warning. As the car pulled away, James exhaled. "He's not done." "No," Catherine replied, "but neither are we." That night, back at the farm, the barn lights glowed warm through the mist. Duke rested inside, healing slowly. Max sat by the front porch, unmoving, but alert. Lady slept at Emma's feet, a quiet protector, in every sense. They were a unit now, not just by law, but by bond. And no piece of paper could undo what they had become. In the weeks that followed, the Parker farm transformed. Not outwardly. The fences still needed mending. The soil remained rocky. But inside the house, something had softened. Healed. There were no more hushed silences over dinner. No more echoes in the hallway. Only Emma's voice laughing as Lady rolled onto her back. Only the sound of Max's footsteps pacing the porch at dusk. Only Duke's slow but steady recovery, his breathing stronger each day. Emma told anyone who asked, "They're hero dogs." But they chose us. And in the quiet corners of their lives, that became a kind of prayer. Catherine, once fearful, now knelt beside Max with ease. Lady followed her room to room like a shadow. And James, stoic practical James, started waking before dawn to brush Duke's coat, humming beneath his breath as he worked. The court date loomed, but they were ready, armed not only with Robert's signed transfer and the check that bore his love, but with testimony From neighbors, from Captain Morrison, from Officer Reynolds, from a town that had watched a grieving family find its heartbeat again, and from a little girl who now slept soundly with 2 shepherds flanking her bed. The night before the hearing, James stepped onto the porch, Max settling beside him. Catherine joined him, wrapping herself in a worn quilt. "You still scared?" he asked softly. She looked toward the barn where Duke slept. "Not of them. Of losing." A pause. Then, "We won't. Even if they take the dogs, they can't take what they gave us." James nodded slowly. "Family." The stars above blinked in solemn agreement. And in the dark, 3 shadows moved as one watching, waiting, guarding the house. They had chosen not by order or training, but by love.